here we go.
Welcome to the Nine Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 9-Route Fantasy Football Podcast. We are talking about our Week 15 starts and sits. Obviously, we touched base in the previous show on waiver wire pickups, streamers at all the positions, and some of these may carry over a little bit. But again, Pat, you and I both talked about it earlier, and we have some players that we think are going to make it or break it for you this week. Who do you like so far? Who's your quarterback start of the week?
Yeah, so again, just to clarify before we start, again, these are generally guys who are not obvious starters. Obviously, you're going to start, your Tom Brady's and your Josh Allen's and, your Dalvin Cooks and all that good stuff. We're not telling you to start these guys over your stud players. What we're hoping to give you with our start sit segment here is some options for possibly your running back, wide receiver 2, or your flex spot, or maybe just like a streaming quarterback, streaming tight end type situation. So these are just guys that we like that maybe are not your household name type players. So obviously, if you have top flight type players, you're going to start those players, but we're going to try to give you some names that maybe you're on the fence about whether to start or not. And we'll give you, hopefully give you our opinion, and hopefully that helps you to make your decision a little bit easier for you. At quarterback this week, I know he's been a top 10 guy, and he is a top 10 guy. For whatever reason, I feel like I still see a lot of leagues where he's on benches and he shouldn't be. So I'm using that reasoning to make Kirk Cousins my start of the week versus the Chicago Bears. The Bears are the third worst team to the quarterback position on the season. And Cousins has been really solid this year. He's actually just below Aaron Rodgers in total points. He's a QB7, at least in our league. We do 6-point passing touchdowns. He has thrown multiple touchdowns, so 2 or more touchdowns in his last 6 straight games, and 10 of 13 so far this season. He's only thrown 5 interceptions, which is tied for second amongst all quarterbacks with at least 8 starts. And he's tied for 5th with 27 touchdown passes. Kirk Cousins has been getting it done. Justin Jefferson has been getting it done. I don't know if Adam Thielen is going to be back for this game, but because it's a Monday night game, I think there's a pretty good shot that, with that extra day, he probably does make it back in time. Even if he doesn't, Kirk Cousins still had a really good week in week 14. I don't see the Bears defense really being any kind of stalwart that's going to stop Minnesota from scoring. I do think that, again, the way Minnesota tends to play these games is, they get out to a pretty big lead and then they sort of let the other team come back. So I do see the Bears being able to score some points and possibly making this, again, we saw a Sunday night game last night against the Packers. It was a 75-point total in that game. I don't necessarily think it's going to be that high Monday night versus the Vikings, but I do think that, obviously the Bears defense is not, the 85 Bears defense. They're pretty susceptible to giving up some points. And I think Kirk Cousins could have a monster game Monday night. What about you? Who you like at quarterback this week?
Going to go out on a little bit of a limb, but I think this guy has potential, and it's hard to find any on this team, but I like what I've seen from him so far in the games that he's played. And again, it's a tough team. It's a bad team, and it is what it is. But I think one of the better rookie quarterbacks this season, when given the opportunity, has been Davis Mills of the Houston Texans going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. We talked about Jacksonville being a dumpster fire, and that's one of the more obvious things is saying water is wet. And yet, looking at right now, he's got 300-yard plus games. Those games came against New England, the Rams, and Seattle, which, yes, you can look back and look at some of those games and say, oh, well, they were blowouts. They lost by 3 to New England, and this is Bill Belichick, who owns quarterbacks. Again, he put up almost 33 points in our league in that game. The Rams, which you knew would be a bit of a shootout offensively against that Texans team, he still put up 310 yards 2 touchdowns. And then most recently this week, he was 33 or 49 for 331 yards and a touchdown. He added another 8 yards on the ground, which again, he's no Lamar Jackson by any stretch. He was smart. He was able to find Brevin Jordan, a tight end, against Seattle. Obviously, Brandon Cooks has been getting the ball all season from him and Tyrod Taylor. But I think the team switching over to him, they want to see what they have in these last 4 games before they go into next season with the concept of picking up another quarterback. Obviously, Deshaun Watson's on the roster, but that won't probably make it much further than the rest of this season. I just think that he has been a pretty solid starter in those games. You know, when you go back and look, again, he had a couple monster defenses going up against it and kind of got thrust into it. It wasn't probably going to be expected to be involved as much as possible. But right after the Jacksonville game at the beginning of the season, you know, where the Texans did have a win, Tyrod Taylor got injured. He kind of got thrust into action that next week when that happened against Cleveland. And then, you know, for a rookie, I think it's a little tricky, not to mention in an offense that really has no clue what's going on. But I love the matchup this week. I think Jacksonville's just toast. And I think coming off of that game against Seattle, I really like Davis Mills this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, there's something to be said for those guys who are auditioning, and Mills is kind of doing that for his own team. So, yeah, I think, you know, in order to potentially be considered, you know, as a starting quarterback for the Texans next year, he's going to have to show and prove that he can do it this year. And I think you're right. I think that in the limited opportunities that he's had this year so far, he has proven that he's at least serviceable. I mean, he's, like you said, he's not Deshaun Watson. There's very few Deshaun Watsons in the NFL, but Mills has shown that he's competent. And like you said, he's got a couple 300-yard games, which, you know, we've got rookie quarterbacks who have played all season, like Mac Jones, who don't have 300-yard games. So it just goes to show that the guy's got some talent and could potentially put something together. And I do like the fact that going up against Jacksonville, that's the time to shine. So that's a really good call. I like that. Sits. Let's go for quarterback sits. Who you looking to sit?
Well, I hate to do it because I love the player. Obviously, he's been a pretty decent quarterback, you know, throughout the season. A lot of people have written him off, you know, last few weeks has been not as involved in the passing game because of the running back. But Carson Wentz of the Indianapolis Colts, he's going up against Bill Belichick in New England. You know, I'm always astounded that he's able to do what he does against quarterbacks. Now, both teams, New England and Indianapolis, are coming off a bye. I really feel like this, and this is going to go into some of my concepts on defense too, is this is going to be a big time of possession battle. And I know you're going to laugh and say, well, yeah, Belichick knows all about it from the Buffalo game. A lot of that was dictated on the weather. But when you really go and look at some of these teams that do just that, they control the football, thus controlling the game. Indianapolis is 3rd and New England is 9th in the league in time of possession. They definitely are involved in running the football. As far as the last 3 weeks going out of, you know, not counting the bye, obviously, Indianapolis was tops. They really do love Jonathan Taylor. They love to run the football. But I feel like that's what's going to be more dictating in the matchup is going to be the two teams just trying to push back, control the football as much as possible. In that time, Carson Wentz did have some big numbers against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had a couple costly turnovers that took away from his total points that would have pushed him plus 30. It was a 300-yard game. It was a bit of a shootout. But when you look back at these other games that the Colts have kind of dominated, they've dominated time of possession, and you're going to do that on the ground. You're not going to do that passing the ball. So I don't feel like Wentz, between the time of possession and the New England defense factor, again, which is one of the tops in the league, defending against the quarterback position, which we've talked about at length. They're second best in the league. I just don't see Wentz having a great matchup this week. So I would try to find a better option on stream, for instance, like we talked about in the previous episode. Pat, who you sitting?
So just real quick to your point about Carson Wentz. So just so the listeners know, we talk a little bit before the podcast and we do tell each other who our start sits are and things like that. But we do that research and we pick those players before we talk to each other. And I actually went Carson Wentz first, and I was going to go Michael Pittman for my wide receiver sit for the week. And I decided to go another direction because I literally was like, I think this is who Rudy's going to pick. So let me go another direction now so I don't have to redo my research after I talk to him. So I do agree. I think I'm right on board with you there with Wentz and that New England defense. My sit of the week is going to be Joe Burrow versus the Denver Broncos. The Broncos are the fourth best team versus the quarterback position. Burrow, he's had a nice season so far, but he's in for a pretty tough matchup. Denver has really shut quarterbacks down so far this year. They're giving up only about 15.5 points per game to the quarterback position, which, obviously is you're looking for, 20 plus from your quarterback. Denver is actually top 12 in interceptions defensively, and Joe Burrow is literally like the worst. He's got 14 interceptions thrown so far this season, which is tied for the lead amongst quarterbacks who have started at least 10 games. So I can see Burrow turning it over here to Denver's talented secondary. Is there a possibility that with this talented wide receiver core that Burrow has a decent game? Yeah, sure. But if I had to bet on it, I would put my money on the Denver defense. From what I've seen so far this year, Burrow can be rattled, and the Denver defense, even in these matchups where I start to worry, the Denver defense comes through and they've been solid. They're top 10 against every position in fantasy this year. So I don't really like any of the Bengals this week, but especially Joe Burrow against that Denver defense. Moving on to our running back position. Who do you like at the running back position this week?
Well, some of this might be dictated too, depending on how Lamar Jackson works out of a high ankle sprain, or maybe he avoided it. You never know once they really get a little further down the road in the week and Wednesday comes and they start to get involved in practice and have to talk about the injury report. I've seen a bit of a resurgence. I know you've noticed it as well. Devonta Freeman going up against the Green Bay Packers. It's, they're a decent defense again against the running backs. They're not world beaters, but they are pretty stout to a certain extent. But I do feel like the volume that he's been getting lately in that offense did get I think Latavius Murray vultured a touchdown from him the other day, yesterday. But what you're looking at there, he's been averaging 15 points a game the last 4 weeks, 20 receptions in that time, 2 touchdowns with Lamar's out, and they're a ground and pound team, but they also pass the ball, which we have mentioned previously. I feel like Devonta Freeman has really just kind of become the focal point of the offense, so to speak. Obviously, it's Lamar's team, and yeah, you can't take away from that. But I mean, over the last 4 weeks, you're looking at 20.7 against Cleveland, and that was a low-scoring battle. Another 20, and then 12 just yesterday. Again, Murray vultured a touchdown, 1 yard, 1 carry, and 1 touchdown. So if you had put that on top of what Devonta Freeman had already done in the game, that would have probably pushed him in again, another 20-plus point game. I feel like throughout the year, he's just been – a lot of people ignore him and things of that nature, but except for the owners or the people that have been at the other end of getting beat because of him. So, again, he's very efficient. He only had 18 touches in the entire game, but to pretty much be for the sake of that 19th, it would have been another 20-point-plus game. I like Devonta Freeman this week, especially if Lamar's out. I feel like he's just going to get used a lot. Tyler Huntley looked to be spreading the ball around, not saying he's a better quarterback, but, being thrust into that game, he looked pretty good, especially if he gets a start. I think Devonta Freeman has top 15 potential this week.
I am going to go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire this week versus the Chargers. I know it feels like I pick the running back that's facing the Chargers every week, and I do, and I'm usually right, which is why I keep sticking with it here. I know that, Edwards-Helaire's fantasy managers have probably been a little disappointed with his season based off of, how things went earlier in the year, then the injury, but he's come back strong. The Chargers are obviously bad against the running back position, but CEH has scored double-digit fantasy points in his last 3 games.
and he's finally being used more at the goal line. It seemed like last year and the first half of this year, he just, for whatever reason, could not get it done at the goal line. I'm not really sure what it was. He seems like he's got the small, stout body type that would be perfect for a goal line back, but he just wasn't able to figure it out. Well, the last couple of weeks, he's had 3 rushing touchdowns in the last 3 games, and he's finally starting to be utilized a little bit more around the goal line, which I like. I do think that there's a very good potential that Darrell Williams has a good game as well against the Chargers. I feel like the Chiefs are, especially with the way the defenses have been playing the Chiefs, it sort of lends itself to the Chiefs having to run the ball more, which they have been, and they've been successful doing it. So I think that this could be one of those games where, the Chargers secondary is really good. They always do a good job against the Chiefs as far as, their pass catchers go, but again, they've been leaking points to the running back position. Again, I mentioned they're the 6th worst to the running back position. So I do think that Edwards-Helaire gets in the end zone again this week, and I think he has a pretty good game out of necessity against the Chargers. Let's move on to our sits. Who are you sitting at running back?
Unfortunately, I would say James Robinson of the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Houston Texans. And ironically, Houston's got a pretty good shot at giving you points when you're a running back. They're one of the worst in the league at stopping the position, yes. But right now, I feel like the Jacksonville Jaguars are just going to spiral out of control and be unreliable on all fronts offensively. Again, I think Urban Meyer is just, it's a joke that he's pretending to be an NFL head coach. You're limiting your best player, which he had a heel injury, which, was being monitored and people were worried. And he seems like he's totally fine. But when your starting quarterback has to go, who's a rookie, and yell at the coach and tell him, to get the guy more involved in the game, why'd you bench him? He did have a fumble. And again, it does happen, but it's not like he's been one of the most unreliable running backs in football for so long. Obviously, he wouldn't be doing what he's doing. And again, he's rotting away, unfortunately, on that team down there at literally I don't quite get it, why he's just 6 carries, 4 yards against the Tennessee Titans. It's just, I don't know. It's just crazy to me. I know they talk about Carlos Hyde getting a little bit more usage, and just, shocker. I mean, it was Urban Meyer's guy from Ohio State. So, he's going to try to find any way to take care of his boys. I just don't really like it. I feel bad. I mean, I know, again, he had fumbles he had fumbles in back-to-back weeks, but I don't feel like he's this, suddenly bust running back that's never going to be used again. But knowing the way that team's going right now, I would unfortunately, and I hate to say it because a lot of people rely on this guy and he's had a pretty decent season. But James Robinson, you're going to have to find a better option this week against the Houston Texans of all teams.
I was actually thinking earlier how I think Robinson could actually have a huge game this week. If Trevor Lawrence's message got through or gets through during the week, I mean, Jacksonville has to do something differently because what they're doing is not working. They threw the ball 40 times against the Titans. And I know the Titans' pass defense has been fairly suspect, but they threw the ball 40 times and only rushed it 8. And technically they only rushed it 7 because one of those rushing attempts was Trevor Lawrence scrambling for 2 yards. So 7 rushing attempts in a game. And I get it. Like especially with Jacksonville, you're down. But the way to get yourself back into games is not to throw the ball a million times and let your rookie quarterback turn it over 4 times, is to give a guy like Robinson the ball and use some clock, keep the ball out of the other team's hands, score some points. James Robinson, I think he had double-digit touchdowns last year. Like, I don't understand. I agree that the way things have been going this year and trending, it does seem like James Robinson is a super shaky start this week. I would hope that, and so far I haven't been proven right, but I would hope that, eventually this coaching staff would get it together and realize that Robinson is their best player. Like at this point, I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be at some point, but right now James Robinson is their best player and they need to get him the ball more often. That's just the way that it is. So I don't root against you, but for James Robinson's sake, I do hope that that he does get a lot more carries this week, and that he does show that he's able to do that. But I can completely understand why you would, in this instance, want to sit him. And if you had him on your roster, I can completely understand going into the first round of the playoffs that you are not confident at all putting him in your lineup. So I get it. I totally understand it. But I had to say my piece about that because it is something that has been bothering me for a while now. And, when I looked at the stats last night and realized that, he had 6 carries for 4 yards, I was like, what is going on? Like, I don't get it.
It's criminal what they're doing to him. And again, even for Lawrence, for his development, like just to pile on to Jacksonville for right now. It's like looking at them, they're about 12th in pass attempts. And yet when it comes to, net yards gained, they are 30th. They only average about they're tied at the bottom for 5.3, net yards per attempt. Meanwhile, rushing wise, they are second to last, only behind the Jets for the worst rushing. Yet yards per attempt, they're at 4.6. They're a top 10 with the ties. You call it like a top 5 rushing offense. So the coaching staff has no clue what they're doing, and they're hopefully not going to screw these guys up moving forward. Because Robinson was, to see him break out from Jacksonville and look like such a breakthrough player. And again, I'm not, trust me, I'm a fan. I'm not rooting against him, but I feel bad for him. And again, Lawrence, Laquan Treadwell's like one of their best wide receivers, and he couldn't play on how many other teams. Now suddenly he's a focal point of the offense. So it's a mess down there, and I do feel bad for Robinson owners. But I think you can find a better option this week, unfortunately.
Yeah, I heard somebody. It might have been you. I heard somebody say that Urban Meyer's still so stuck in his college ways that he's basically just looking for college superstars to bring back. And I don't know if he feels like he's going to, I don't know, be seen as a genius for resurrecting these guys' careers, or maybe erecting their careers that were never good to begin with. I don't know, but it doesn't make any sense. Or how you have guy like Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, who is super talented, James Robinson. How do you have those 3 talented guys on your team, and the focal point is not to get those guys the ball? I don't know. I just don't understand it.
Yeah. And Lawrence is, considered a generational quarterback talent, and he's an afterthought when it comes to, and an offensive rookie of the year, or, hey, how's he doing down there? And people thought Jacksonville could have been a black hole, but with that coach, it's not looking too well for that team.
Right.
So let's,
I was gonna say, let's stop beating up the Jags. I feel like every other team in the NFL does.
It's not hard. Right. Yet somehow they got a winner through there. But we're looking, who you sitting this week at running back, Pat?
So this may not be a popular sit, and you may not have the ability to sit this guy based off of, where you probably drafted him, but I'm going to sit Saquon Barkley this week versus the Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys are the 4th best team versus the running back position, and their defense has just been exceptional this year. For as bad as Dallas's defense was last year, they have completely turned things around. Micah Parsons looks like he could very easily win defensive rookie. He's going to win defensive rookie of the year, and quite possibly defensive player of the year. He's been that good. But they get the Giants offense, who has just been absolutely pathetic. The Cowboys do give up some points to the wide receiver position. That's mostly just because teams have to throw against them because their offense is so potent and so powerful that they actually score the second most points in the league, behind only the Tampa Bay Bucs. So, you are going to give up some points to the wide receiver position, and there's a possibility Barkley does get some targets out of the backfield. So there's a possibility that he could catch some passes and make me look stupid here. But, we talked a little bit earlier about Devontae Booker and how he's, getting about 45% of the team's snaps, carries, targets. And for me, a slowed Saquon Barkley, who's getting only 55% of the team's snaps and going up against one of the top 5 teams against the running back position, that's just a recipe for a guy I don't want to play. And again, like I said, I know that that's probably not what you want to hear as a Saquon Barkley owner going into the playoffs, and you may be forced to start him because, maybe you don't have any other options. But, I suggested sitting Nick Chubb this week against the Ravens. I think he had 9.5 PPR points, which is not great. I think he finished, well outside the top 24 running back. So I'm not saying that I know anything or whatever. I could completely be off on the Saquon Barkley thing, but I do feel like this is just not a good spot for Barkley. And I think that you could probably find a better option out there. I honestly might play, if Tony Pollard's healthy, I would probably rather play Tony Pollard in this matchup rather than Saquon. So I like Saquon Barkley. I think he's a super talented guy. I just think, he's a guy that needs to be in the right matchup, and then I think maybe next year he's got a shot at sort of coming back and being what he was his rookie season. But for this year, he just doesn't seem to have it, and definitely not going to have it against the Cowboys, I don't think. All right, so let's move into our wide receivers. Who you want to start this week at wide receiver?
Well, I kind of want to go with the hot hand. I'm going to go with Russell Gage versus the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners do give up some points to the wide receiver position, roughly, totaling right around 23, 24 points a game to the position. So it doesn't all go to one player. But looking at what Russell Gage again has done recently, again, he's been last 4 weeks. He's a top 20 wide receiver in fantasy football the last 4 weeks. He had always been a guy that flashed potential, even back when Julio and Calvin Ridley were there. They kind of, felt certain kind of way about him and thought that he was that next man up. And he always had injury issues, and that seemed to even carry over a little bit into this season. But seeing what he's done, he's pretty much been, like I said, the last couple of weeks, especially even the last 2 weeks, he's been, again, like a top 10, top 15 wide receiver, top 20 the last 4 weeks, 14th in targets, which is pretty solid volume right there. And again, averaging that 15 points a game. I just kind of like that. And I like the matchup that maybe the Niners get involved in a shootout. Maybe the Niners dominate the game. Either way, I think they're just going to throw the football. They really haven't been too much involved in the running game. Mike Davis has been rather non-existent, and Cordarrelle Patterson, the resurgence there, has been, mainly as a dual threat. You got Kyle Pitts. He had a nice game over the weekend, but not enough to kind of shake loose. I think Gage really is a player moving forward. He could be one of those guys that ends up winning your league for you. Personally, that's my opinion. As a flex, as a wide receiver too, as long as he stays healthy and he's getting that 7 to 10 targets a game, I think that's going to push him into that threshold. I like the matchup. I like Russell Gage this week to start your playoffs against the San Francisco 49ers. And what do you think, Pat? Who you like?
I am actually going to go right on the other side of the ball in that same game and start Brandon Ayuk versus the Atlanta Falcons.
So are you in or out, just like Ayuk on, the other day? I know he was close to the goal line or close to the out of bounds on that call. So,
oh no, he definitely scored, and I mainly believe that because I started him in one of my fantasy leagues. So sticking to that story,
keeping that baggage. Yes, sir.
So looking at, sort of where Brandon Ayuk came from beginning of the season and sort of how things have changed in San Francisco. I did some pretty deep digging on this one. So weeks 1 through 9, Brandon Ayuk averaged 3.3 targets, and Deebo Samuel averaged just under 8.9 targets per week, weeks 1 through 9. Weeks 10 through 14, Brandon Ayuk has gone up to 7 targets per game, while Deebo has dropped down to 3 targets per game. Now, the Niners, during that 5-game span from week 10 on, are 4-1. Prior to the last 5-game span, they were 3-5. So whatever they've got going on with Deebo Samuel out of the backfield, Kittle and Ayuk being more of your standard pass catching type players, has been working for them. And I know that they've kind of taken a page out of Atlanta's book, which is this is kind of a fun matchup. You've got Cordarrelle Patterson and Deebo Samuel, 2 guys who, weren't really expected to do a whole lot this year, who have sort of, like you said, like kind of come on strong. They're both being used in similar fashions. It's actually a pretty interesting game and a pretty interesting matchup to watch. But with those 7 targets per game in the last 5 games, Brandon Ayuk has 5 double-digit fantasy points in his last 7 games, but 4 in those last 5. And this matchup against Atlanta in a game where San Francisco needs to win in order to continue to stay in this playoff hunt, I see San Francisco 49ers coming out and, trying to put just as many points on the board as possible against this pretty bad Atlanta defense. I do agree. I think, Atlanta is going to have to throw to keep up. And with all the injuries in the secondary for San Francisco, there's a very good possibility that Gage, Kyle Pitts, even guys like Tajay Sharp could potentially have, monster games this week. I think, again, this is one of those games where both teams could score a lot of points. I know San Francisco's offense has been pretty high powered, for a team that's run first, they score a lot of points. And I think this could be a very fun and very interesting game. And it's one of the games that I'm actually really looking forward to watching this week. But I really like Ayuk this week versus the Falcons.
Who you sitting?
Well, I also own this gentleman in one of my leagues, and I'm not happy about it. But luckily for me, I have a bye this week, so I don't have to worry about that. But if I did have to play this week, I would not start DJ Moore versus the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are obviously the best defense versus the wide receiver position, number one overall. They have just basically shut down every wide receiver that they've played this year. They only give up 26.1 PPR points per game to the wide receiver position as a whole. That's not one wide receiver. That's every wide receiver on the team. And with the struggles that Carolina has been going through with the quarterback position, Cam has been benched now twice in the last two games. McCaffrey is out, and that offense just looks completely different without him. They held their own against Atlanta this week, but when you lose to a team like Atlanta, and no offense to Atlanta, but they're not going anywhere this year. But when you're in a playoff hunt like the Carolina Panthers were, and you lose to a team like Atlanta, it just shows how completely dysfunctional your offense is. And I can honestly say, I can see the Bills like 44-0, like completely blowing Carolina out. I don't have a good feeling about this game for anybody on the Panthers. And I am very, very glad that I don't have to play DJ Moore this week. What about you? Who's your sit?
Well, I mean, he coming off the game he just had might be, I can't say obvious for a lot of people. He still can, they still look at him as a top 10, top 12, top 15 receiver. But again, the injury may also be involved in this too. But Terry McLaurin from the Washington football team, it was bad enough you're already going up against the Eagles, who are the third best team in shutting down the wide receiver position. Last 4 weeks, he's averaged 9.4 points a game. That's not going to get it done as a wide receiver one, which is how he was drafted. That might be limping to the barn wide receiver two. That's barely flex worthy. Now, I know he took a big hit in the third quarter against Dallas and being evaluated for concussion. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see if there's any lingering effects based on that or anything else. But he just hasn't been getting it done. I also heard a report that Taylor Heineke, his knee was okay, but his arm or elbow was a little sore after that game as well. So you could have a banged up quarterback throw into a banged up wide receiver in a tough division game. I just don't like it based on the matchup alone. And looking at the fact that there was, if he gets knocked out in the third, there was no involvement in the first half. That's kind of rough. Again, maybe they locked him down. I know Trayvon Diggs has been a pretty solid cornerback on a team that does let up some yardage in the passing game. But Terry McLaurin for me would be a sit this week. I couldn't trust him. And again, the injuries may dictate a lot of that, let alone the matchup. I don't think you have to scramble, but you may have to look to move a flex into a wide receiver spot and then upgrade on that third tier on the flex. So Terry McLaurin, sorry, buddy, until you can prove you can get back in the game, we're going to have to put you on the bench.
Yeah, especially against an Eagles team that ranks third against the wide receiver position. Yeah, that's an insta sit right there. So what about tight ends? Let's go, since you're starting, you're sitting McLaurin, you got to be starting a tight end for the Washington football team against the Eagles now.
No. Again, to me, it's a little murky. Like I said, and granted, that is the matchup of matchups against the Eagles. They may look to try to exploit that, like I said, with either Seals Jones or John Bates getting involved to a certain extent. But I kind of like actually in the same game, but on the other side of it. I like Dallas Goddard, and I like him based on really like the last 4 weeks. Obviously, he's been starting to get a little bit more involved in the offense. You saw a big game with Gardner Minshew, so there's something to be said there. Obviously, again, that could be a factor for who starts. Again, if Hurts is still a little banged up and they wait one more week, maybe not now that Washington lost just the other day against Dallas, which now that means the Eagles are breathing down their neck for playoff spots and things of that nature. Again, the Eagles aren't as bad or up and down as they've been all season. Washington currently holds the third wild card, but if the Eagles were to beat them head to head, looking at all the tiebreakers, they'd slide right on into that playoff spot, and people be a little surprised. Goddard had a monster game right before the bye against the Jets. Minshew is the quarterback, but I think the overall offense is going to start to have to look more his way because he had a couple games there where he disappeared. Washington's decent. They're top 10 against that position, so tiny bit of a stretch. Did see some news that Jonathan Allen for the Washington football team, their defensive tackle, has been really, really good for him. He just tested positive for COVID. There's a chance that he could miss the game. And they're already a little hurting on the defensive side of the football between injuries and whatnot. So this could be something else that does factor into, again, just the offense maybe being allowed to operate a little easier. Coming out of a bye, I think everybody needed the rest. So I kind of like Dallas Goedert this week. I think he's got top 7, maybe a little higher, but top 7 tight end potential in a tough, grueling matchup division NFC East against the Washington football team. Pat, how about yourself? Who you starting at tight end this week?
Well, I'm going to go with a guy who's getting a little bit of extra rest this week, Tyler Higbee. Reading a little bit more into that COVID situation. It looks like it was a false positive, but unfortunately under the NFL's rules for the COVID nonsense, any positive test, you still have to show 2 negative tests 24 hours apart, which obviously he's not going to be able to do that before the game that starts in about an hour and a half. So Tyler Higbee's going to be out this week, but it doesn't seem like he's got any symptoms. He's not sick. He's not, under the weather or anything like that. He's not feeling the effects. It doesn't even seem like he has COVID. It's just a, sort of a technicality, unfortunately, but I really like him next week versus Seattle. Seattle's the 5th worst team. We talked about this on our last episode a little bit as far as streaming tight ends, but Higbee has kind of been a little bit of a disappointment this year from, a fantasy perspective, but he's still averaging 5.2 targets per game on a really good offense. And Seattle's been bad versus the tight end all year, but pretty good against the quarterback and the wide receiver positions. So it's one of those things where I'm not going to sit Cooper Kupp or Beckham or Van Jefferson in this instance just because Seattle has been good versus the wide receiver position. But the fact that they do concentrate their defensive backs on the wide receivers, which they're definitely going to need to do if they want to have any shot against the Rams next week, I think that Tyler Higbee could see a little bit more than 5 targets. And I think that there's a pretty good shot that, again, in the red zone, a big body like Higbee is a really good target for Matthew Stafford. And I think that there's a decent chance that Higbee could score a touchdown versus the Seahawks this week. What about your sit at tight end? Who are you going with there?
Well, I know for some people, they've been enjoying the volume or trying to chase it a little bit. And I think now is time you got to cut bait if he's even really involved. But again, for those that are the streamers out there, especially, I know this guy let you down a little bit this past week. Cole Kmet, Chicago Bears. He looked like he had a shot to start to pick up some steam. Again, he had been starting to get involved a lot more in the offense as far as being targeted. But at the end of the day, you're really not getting the output that you want. He had a couple 14-point games kind of wrapped around the buys, but most of his stuff's been on the bottom end. 3 passes on 5 targets for 17 yards. And again, with the quarterback flux that's been Dalton, Fields, Dalton, back and forth, and even Fields, actually, his hand's a little banged up. Hopefully everything's okay there. I know it's just coming out of a tough division game. But at the end of the day, I don't feel like you can trust him at all where, for some people, oh, yeah, he's a sleeper and he's this. he just hasn't developed into that guy yet. Now, whether he's just being involved a lot more in pass protection, run blocking, and he's not looked upon as a receiver, it could be something. But I think if you're not in PPR, you have no shot of using him. But for the PPR people that are chasing that, the fact that he's getting targets on a weekly basis, where like in the last 4 weeks he had been kind of like a top 10 or 12 in targets. But again, he's not getting the points. He's only got 2 red zone targets. Again, nothing to really show for it. So unfortunately, if you were thinking about it, please don't use Cole Kmet against the Minnesota Vikings. And oh, by the way, they're 8th best against the tight end position. So that's another reason to put him on the bench.
I'm going to be benching Dalton Schultz this week. This really isn't so much of a matchup play. The Giants are mid-pack against the tight end position, but this is more of just an observation play. Schultz has been a pretty big part of the offense when he's been the third option, but when Cooper, Lamb, and Gallup are all in the lineup and all healthy, the 4 games that all 3 of those guys have played together, this is what Dalton Schultz's target counts look like: 6, 2, 5, and 3. And in those 4 games, he's only averaged 5.9 fantasy points, and that's in PPR scoring. So, I think the beginning of his season was based a little bit more out of necessity with Gallup going down, week 1 and sort of being gone for quite a few weeks there. I think that Schultz really benefited from all the extra targets that he saw in that offense. But now that Gallup is back, it seems like Dak is sort of looking to those wide receivers and really to those wide receivers alone. Even the running backs are not getting a ton of targets out of the backfield. So, and then when you have 3 guys as talented as Cooper, Lamb, and Gallup are, obviously, when you drop back, you're looking for those guys. So Schultz has sort of become more of a, dump off safety net. Maybe I need 5 or 6 yards to get a first down type thing. And that's where he's sort of made his mark in this offense in the past few weeks. I think as long as all 3 of those guys are healthy, I just don't see Schultz being really needed in this offense. And I honestly, I probably won't play him unless one of those guys is out of the lineup. I actually have him in our league of record. I played him against you this week and I regretted that instantly, but I unfortunately did not have a choice since TJ Hawkinson was ruled out. I actually, when I put him in the lineup, I was like, yeah, I really don't like the feel of this, but at the same time, I was like, there's really no better options on the waiver wire. So I would have probably picked up and played Tyler Conklin had I knew that Hawkinson was going to be out, which wouldn't have done me any good, but he didn't have a great game either. But I really just didn't like Schultz going into the game. I don't like him going into this game, and I really don't like him for the rest of the season personally. Again, barring an injury to one of those top 3 wide receivers.
Pat, tell us how you really feel about Dalton Schultz, please.
Well, if if Sony Michel has 37 points tonight, then I will love Dalton Schultz. He'll be my best friend. I don't really care. But if I have to lose to you because of his 1.4 point fantasy performance, yeah, him and I are not going to be friends. I mean, he's a Cowboy anyway, so I already don't like the guy. Okay. But it is what it is. I guess Jason Witten's not a bad dude. He seems like he's an all right guy.
Yeah, it just sucks in the booth. That's all. All right. Well, you're sitting Dalton Schultz. Who is your defensive start for the week?
So I know that when we went over the streaming defenses in the last episode, you kind of prefaced this call with a little "Don't laugh at me." So I'm going to preface it with the same "Don't laugh at me." But I really like the Houston Texans versus the Jags this week. We obviously, we completely destroyed them just a few minutes ago. And you're right. It's just been a terrible, terrible season for them. I mean, it seems like from the whole Urban Meyer bar scene situation thing that went on earlier in the season, it seems like from that point on, not that the Jags were winning games before that, but from that point on, things really got bad. Jacksonville, just to keep it football and not necessarily storyline. Jacksonville leads the league in turnovers. Them and the Jets, they have 25 turnovers. The Houston defense, believe it or not, has forced 21 turnovers this season, which is tied for 7th best in the NFL. obviously I'm not saying that, again, I'm not saying, drop your New England Patriots defense and pick up Houston to play them against Jacksonville. Honestly, it would not surprise me if Houston scored more points defensive wise than New England did this week based on the matchups. I'm not saying to do that, just so we're all clear, but I do think that they have a pretty good shot at, turning. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is just, he's thrown 20 interceptions or something like that so far this year, through 4 this past week. I mean, he's just turning the ball over at, it's like Peyton Manning rookie year clip here. It's getting pretty pathetic. And the fact that he's disgruntled with the coaching staff and, all of that, I would literally play any defense against the Jacksonville Jaguars if I had no other option. If I didn't have a better option, I would play them. So I'm going to take the Houston Texans this week versus the Jags.
Yeah, he's been sacked 25 times. I mean, yeah, it's a bad team. I do think it's a pretty solid call on that defense for a start.
The last time, by the way, I have suggested the Houston Texans defense one time earlier in the season when they played the Jets, and they ended up being a top 8 defense that week. So those things are possible, even though the Texans are not a great team either. Their defense has not been what has let them down. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. And the Texans will shred them, being led by Davis Mills. But
General Mills.
Look at that! Hey. Is that Captain Crunch or no?
That's on the other. That's the other side.
Yeah,
that's what they're calling Trevor Lawrence now, I think.
I have to think of some other names with cereals. That'll be good. That'll keep me going most of the night. But okay, so I going a little homerish, but again, I do like the matchup, and especially if people are banged up. Philadelphia Eagles against the Washington football team. Last 4 weeks, the Eagles have been like 8th best defense in fantasy football. Washington football team's offense, to say it sputters is being probably a little bit polite. They are not world beaters. You got a quarterback who's a little banged up now. The running backs seem like they're starting to get. Well, Gibson's gotten healthier, then McKissick gets hurt. Again, and McLaurin looks like he's a little banged up. But looking at how they actually do things, again, this benefits the defense. They are 5th overall, the Washington football team, in turnover percentage per drive. And when you think about it, if you're a team that just can't seem to get it together and can't seem to do what needs to be done on offense, I mean, it's not good. 15% of their drives end up in a turnover. That's right up there with the Bears, the Jets, the Jaguars, who we talked about, and Kansas City. That puts them 5th overall. So that's, 15% of their drives end up in turnovers. So Eagles are probably going to make something happen on that level this weekend, let alone just maybe keeping the score a little bit low. We'd look to get involved on that level as well. So I like the Eagles matchup coming out of a bye week against a turnover prone Washington football team.
All right. So who are you going to sit at the defensive position then?
I am going to go back to the well in a sense. Talked about Carson Wentz versus New England and sitting him. I'm also going to sit the Indianapolis Colts. Again, it's going on the concepts of, I think that, again, it's just going to be a grindy, low scoring game, which will help to benefit defenses a little bit. But I don't think you're not going to get the turnovers that you need. You're not going to get maybe the sacks that you need. I think it's going to be a running back heavy game with some passes mixed in. I don't think that's going to happen again. Like looking at like New England and Indianapolis, they aren't as heavy on the turnover scene. And when it comes to running the football and the time of possession, they're definitely going to be looking to control the clock. So while the defense may get, in that 5 to 7 points, which if for you that's acceptable, maybe that's fine. And again, you never know. This game could get out of hand. This looks to me like a grinder, but Belichick coming out of a bye, he could turn around and be 24-0 before you know it. They're lighting them up, and maybe Indy doesn't know what hit them. I just don't like that matchup again against Indianapolis. They're 9th best at giving up points to a defense, so they don't give up a lot, and that is Bill Belichick's MO. If you beat them, you beat them solid, you beat them honest. You're not going to get too many games where you really outfox him or cause his team to look like they don't know what they're doing on the field. The defense has been one thing, but the offense has been pretty consistent. So I don't like Indy this week against New England.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough matchup for both of those defenses, I think. But yeah, I agree. I think Indy is, even though they actually have forced the most turnovers in the league this year, uh, New England doesn't turn the ball over a ton, and
Yeah.
I think Belichick, kind of realizes, again, like you talked about a little bit earlier with the time of possession type game. I feel like there's going to be a lot of rushing attempts in this game, and that generally leads itself to less turnovers when you're not putting the ball in the air. So yeah, I could definitely see a 21-20 type game with each team only throwing 25 passes or something like that. I am going to sit. This is going to be pretty obvious, but I picked a defense that is our top 6 defense so far in fantasy. But they're going up against a really tough team and division game. I'm going to sit the New Orleans Saints versus Tampa Bay Bucks. It's pretty obvious, but the Saints do one thing really well on defense, which is stop the run, and the Buccaneers do one thing on offense really well, and that's throw the ball. And so that really is not a great combination for the New Orleans Saints. Had they been a better pass defense, you might think about playing them. Maybe forcing the Bucks to run the ball a little bit more, which honestly they've been doing that pretty effectively as well. So I don't necessarily think there's a good way to stop Tampa Bay's offense. And I think unfortunately the Saints they're just going to be outmatched in this game, as most teams are, by Tom Brady and that super talented offense. So as many weeks as I think you can start New Orleans, this is definitely not one of those weeks. So I'm going to sit the Saints versus the Bucks this week.
Smart man.
All right. So do you have any other, before we let everybody go here, do you have any other words of wisdom, advice, any sort of tips, tricks, practices that this episode is going to probably be out literally right before the fantasy playoffs start, probably Thursday morning, I believe it will be released. So, any last minute things before people set their lineups for that Thursday night game that you want to impart some wisdom?
Well, I mean, again, we do this, Pat and I, we're doing this for fun because we love fantasy football. We're trying to help you guys out. And, we feel like we have an idea of what's going on. We are one of many voices out there. There is so much information on starts and sits, on player rankings week to week. What do I do? Do I put? You can easily second guess yourself when it comes to, especially coming into the playoffs, almost like a real NFL team. Looked great all season, get into the playoffs, tighten up like a drum, get knocked out in the first round, maybe in the second when people thought that they were the overall champ to be and really had nothing standing in their way. Injuries aside, those are things you cannot control. Obviously, COVID's a little bit of an issue now where, albeit not an injury, but somebody can get flagged and pulled from a game rather quick, which can jam you up pretty hard. I think what you really need to do is, if not before, by Wednesday, take a look at your team if you have questions. And, or maybe you're wondering how the hell you got in the playoffs. Take a look at your team. Look at your best players. Look at what got you there. Those guys should be your starters. If you stream a position, you're going to look for the best possible matchup. Again, it may not be the most attractive. Go with what got you there, almost going with your gut in a sense. Obviously, some people have those lineups that were drafted well and they're just auto starts. They really don't have to do any fine tuning. But for others, you're looking to play an advantage and things of that nature. I think you need to just relax, look at what got you there. Maybe just compare it to guys that have been hotter lately. If it's a coin flip, we're trying to give you that idea of obviously players that have come on strong lately, but aren't jokes. These aren't one-hit wonders. These are guys that are based on the volume, based on the matchups, based on what that offense has turned into throughout the season. We want to make sure that you understand that, we're here to help. You have any questions, you can obviously contact us, email, Twitter, other social media. So if you have questions, we'd love to help. We'd love to answer. And again, we just feel like it, at least I feel like it, just relax, take a look at that lineup, see what got you there and go with it. If it wasn't meant to be, it wasn't meant to be. You can't control it. But as long as you put out what you're comfortable with, you didn't second guess yourself. You don't go into Sunday and you made some react move because Schefter tweeted something out or this person threw something out last minute that just kind of, you kind of ran with it. Go with what got you there. Again, if it's an injury, something you got to get out of the way, that's a whole different story. But I think you just need to relax and take a look at what got you there. And again, win or lose, I think you'll still be satisfied. And again, you won't be second guessing your abilities.
Yeah, all of our contact information is at the end of each episode. Our Twitter, our email. Like I said, we realize that at this point in time, most of the people listening to this podcast probably know us. We share it with our friends and family and things like that. So feel free to contact us. I mean, listen, even if I'm playing against you, I had a friend of mine contact me this week. I needed his team to lose to make the playoffs, but he asked for my advice and I gave it to him honestly. And it looks like he's probably going to make the playoffs, not necessarily because he followed my advice. I'm just saying, because he has a good team, but listen, we'll help you out, man. If you want to shoot us a text, if you want to hit us up on Twitter, email, Facebook, whatever, any way that you can contact us. If you have a question, we are more than happy to help walk you through it. We don't just give you an answer and as far as, who to start, who to sit, or, should I pick this guy up? I'm not going to just be like, yeah, pick him up. I'm going to give you a reason why I think you should pick him up. And if it makes sense to you, then go with it. And that's what we try to do with this podcast. We try to not just throw names at you, but give you legitimate reasons why we believe what we believe. And that's basically, like Scott just said, that's how you have to go through your fantasy playoffs. If you believe in a guy, put him in your lineup. If he, you kind of sort of alluded to the popular fantasy football saying, start your studs. That's what you got to do. I mean, if they're your best players, if they have gotten you there, then stick with them. Sometimes guys are going to have bad matchups, but the better players are the better players for a reason. So stick with those guys. Don't, second guess yourself. I was just telling Scott this past week that, one of the reasons why I missed the playoffs in our league of record is because I did that. I second guessed myself. Stick with your guys. Like you said, that's great advice. And like I said, don't feel bad asking us for help. If you're listening to this, we're here to help you out. And if you win your fantasy league because of advice that we gave, that's going to make me, at least, I can't speak for Scott, but I know it'll make me feel almost as good as if I win my fantasy league. So,
as long as you're not beating me doing it, I don't care. I'm happy.
Exactly. And like
here.
I said, I will still give you honest advice. Honestly, I mean, that's who I am as a person. Like I want to win. I do. I want to be competitive, but I also understand that, since we started this podcast, that's sort of what I signed up for, is to give honest feedback and advice if asked. So I promise to do that, even if it's at the expense of me taking an L. And with that, I guess we're done for the week. Good luck this week if you made your fantasy playoffs. If you did not make your fantasy playoffs, still pay attention. I know in our league of record, we have a tournament for draft position next year. So keeps everybody engaged and involved. And we encourage you to do the same in your leagues. It's fun for people to still have something to play for. So, hopefully, even if you're not in the playoffs, you're still actively engaged in football and in fantasy football. And, if you play in enough leagues, you're bound to make the playoffs in one or two of them. So good luck to everybody this week.
We'd like to sincerely thank you for listening to the show. You can follow us on Twitter at the 9route1 and at Scott from Delco. We put out a lot of funny and informative information on there. Our email address, if you'd like to email the show, is the 9routeFFB@gmail.com. Make sure to click the little plus wherever you're listening to follow the show. And if you like what we do, please leave us a review. Good luck this week, and we'll be back next week with more fantasy football info to take your team deep here on the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.